Alright kids, for today's topic we're going to discuss that hack fraud Martin Scorsese.
The Oscar-winning auteur continues to shake his fist at the Marvel gods.
God forbid someone have an opinion this day and age.
But he's fighting a war he already lost.
Now let's learn what that war is, shall we?
There's a new Scorsese movie coming out, so of course it's time for another round of the esteemed filmmaker's King Lear-like rants against Marvel and superhero movies as an existential threat to the art of cinema, Western civilization, and the very act of movie-going itself.
I mean, the man made The Wolf of Wall Street. If anyone should have something to say, it's him.
In a recent GQ interview to promote Killers of the Flower Moon, Scorsese reiterates points he made in 2019 while promoting his snore fest The Irishman.
There are words we can use to describe The Irishman. Snore fest would not be one of them. That just seems like an unnecessary jab at the man.
Marvel films are corrupting the audience by addicting them to theme park movies. There will be generations now that think movies are only that. That's what movies are, studios. He says are not really interested any longer in supporting individual voices that express their personal feelings or their personal thoughts on a big budget. And what's happened now is that they've pigeonholed it to what they call indies.
But he's exactly right about this. The article is trying to say he's not, but that's exactly what they're doing.
There are plenty of reasons to be appalled by Marvel movies, especially in their unfocused and overproduced recent incarnations.
The person writing the article admits this.
Marty may not have noticed, but the guaranteed audience for these films is already tiring of them with the so-called superhero film fatigue, and has been shrinking drastically. The Eternals and Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania were outright flops, and a lot of fans seem to have grudge-watched movies like Thor, Love and Thunder, which was trash by the way, Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness. Meanwhile, the DCU continues to be a mishmash of money-losing and wildly unpopular films, fluke successes, Wonder Woman and Aquaman.
Side note, we're going to consider a movie that made $1 billion of fluke somehow.
Movies that perform regardless of quality because they feature the Batman.
So in the same breath, we're saying that DC is money-losing and unpopular, then say that Batman is going to perform good regardless of quality. Okay, got it.
But to act like theme park movies are a new phenomenon deserving of fresh and universal agita is disingenuous coming from a filmmaker who has had Steven Spielberg and George Lucas on speed dial for over 40.
They are a new phenomenon in a sense that we've never had a cinematic universe before Marvel. And yes, George Lucas, who famously made one of the most successful indie movies of all time. What are we doing here? Genuine question. Also, what are we trying to imply here about Spielberg or Lucas? They've both also made successful films on their own. All three of these men are great filmmakers.
The war Scorsese wants filmmakers to wage was either lost decades ago or maybe never existed.
I don't know about that one, Chief. They go on to give a history lesson on Star Wars success, which is irrelevant as far as I'm concerned.
Scorsese, more than anybody, ought to know what a long-standing problem the theme parkification of cinema is, because he's always had trouble finding an audience.
All right, there's a lot of layers to this. For one, we're proving his point right. Making movies is a niche and hard business, and he's been fighting the good fight for years. For another, we're calling the man a hack who's had trouble finding an audience. The man has made successful, critically acclaimed films. I'd say he's found his audience. This just feels more and more like a hit piece the more I read it.
Raging Bull is hailed today as a signature masterpiece, but it only earned $24 million at the box office on an $18 million budget.
Box office is not the end-all in terms of a movie's quality. I wish people would understand this. Also, he made twice the budget back. It's a success, but you know, whatever, that doesn't matter.
It was bracketed on either side by two of Scorsese's many outright fiscal fiascos, the anti-musical New York, New York, or Raging Bull with a saxophone, and the disturbing Robert De Niro Jerry Lewis vehicle, The King of Comedy.
The man has never missed, not once. Damn legend.
New York, New York came out in 1977, the year of Star Wars. Raging Bull flopped in 1980, the year of The Empire Strikes Back. The King of Comedy failed in a marketplace dominated by E.T. the Extraterrestrial. In other words, Scorsese, who was in the process of becoming briefly unbankable, must have noticed what was going on. And as the studios turned away completely from the artist-driven and bespoke production models of the The 70s toured the high-concept escapism Marty's personal pals Steven and George were pioneering and imposing upon the movie-going world. The serious movie artists of an earlier age, not just Scorsese but also Francis Ford Coppola, Robert Altman, Friedkin, Cimino, Peter Bogdanovich, Paul Mazursky, began to dwindle. Scorsese's response was to briefly return to his indie origins with a micro-budgeted black comedy, After Hours, that barely became the first box office success he'd known since Taxi Driver almost a decade earlier. The indie world he adjudges as creatively inadequate in his latest GQ interview rescued his career, and then he partnered with major stars Tom Cruise and Paul Newman and saved himself some more with The Color of Money, his terrible but Oscar-winning follow-up to Robert Rosson's downbeat classic The Hustler.
How dare a film dared to come out in the year of Star Wars by that hack indie filmmaker, George Lucas. Scorsese even dared to release another film during a Star Wars year. The audacity. But didn't this article say that Lucas has been in Scorsese's pocket for 40 years? We don't know what point we're trying to make anymore, are we? Are they friends or rivals? Who knows? Not this auteur author. They're trying to say his movies were flops and Spielberg basically created the blockbuster films we know of today. Sure, whatever. This article makes absolutely no sense. Oh, and what's that? Scorsese has had box office success. Barely. Huh. I thought the dude was an amateur hack fraud, what gives? So now we're saying he's upset with the indie scene. He's helped make indie films. I feel like this dude didn't do his research. Also, he made that terrible film The Color of Money, you know, the one that won an Oscar. Just trash all around. How dare Scorsese make terrible, box office successful, award-winning films? Who does he think he is? Steven Spielberg. I looked up the article the AV Club was referencing when they said Scorsese didn't like indie films. I'll put Scorsese's quote here, but he was misquoted in this article. Scorsese said he doesn't like the terminology. To quote here, the thing about it is, it would be great to see not only blockbusters on a big screen, franchises on a big screen, but also what they consider now indie films. I don't like that title. I think that categorizes, pigeonholes. I think they're films for everyone, and I would love to see a support from theaters, particularly, which would make it possible for people to want to come to a theater to see a film that isn't necessarily a blockbuster that needs a giant screen.
Scorsese may not fully realize this because out of all his contemporaries, he has been the lucky one.
Are we jealous of his success? What is this trying to say? How is he lucky? The man has made some truly incredible films. He's the most respected and diligent filmmaker alive. But he's lucky. How? Absolute vile garbage take.
Still, Scorsese gets funded at a high level the way Michelangelo did, because his name confers prestige on the patron, and so he continues to create and fail at a level a younger and hungrier talent like Damien Chazelle will likely only get to taste once.
I feel now we're admitting we've never sat down and watched a Scorsese film before. A theme in a lot of his movies is the hubris of man, their follies. I think this author is confusing Scorsese for Michael Bay, and I'm not even joking.
So Scorsese continues to get funded at a scale superior filmmakers like Coppola and Altman could only dream about.
Yeah, too bad for Coppola. Dude's never made a big budget film or whatever. Don't even know who the other guy is. I'm being sarcastic, by the way.
He's had a couple of major hits, Shutter Island and The Wolf of Wall Street, released during peak DiCaprio, that are among his biggest films. But each smash or break even has been offset by flops like Gangs of New York, Hugo, Silence, and The Irishman.
As if DiCaprio isn't still going strong and isn't one of the best leading actors of our generation. We're really gonna sit here and say Silence and The Irishman were flops. Wow. Flops in terms of financial success. Does that make them bad films? Is that what we're saying here? Genuinely. If you've never watched Silence, it's a beautiful film and I recommend it over any Marvel movie.
Still, Scorsese gets funded at a high level the way Michelangelo did, because his name confers prestige on the patron, and so he continues to create and fail at a level a younger and hungrier talent like Damien Chazelle will likely only get to taste once.
Michelangelo was a hack fraud too, just so you know. He could never make a movie like The Avengers. Now for Damien Chazelle. His last film Babylon was a flop. I never watched it if I'm being honest, but the dude made La La Land, which swept all the awards the year it came out. But that doesn't matter since it's over for him. He'll never get to make a movie ever again because of a bully like Scorsese, not because of Babylon's horrible marketing or bad reviews. It's all that darn Scorsese's fault. Even though Chazelle currently has a screenplay in the works, I'm sure Lucas or Spielberg have never had duds in their careers either.
None of this is a recent development, and none of this is Marvel's fault. Marvel's Kevin Feige merely perfected a pre-existing system. Even if you're a Marvel hater, it must be grudgingly admitted that escapist fantasies have always been a large part of what moviegoing is about, and that the MCU has given a great deal of pleasure to a whole lot of moviegoers in a crisis-haunted time.
Marvel didn't do anything wrong. It just homogenized an entire genre of film and made it almost impossible to get smaller budgeted movies made today. It also pushes out smaller films from screens at movie theaters so that only their movies play, but that's more of a Disney problem, not to mention that they barely pay the VFX artists. But I digress. The MCU is like the equivalent of eating McDonald's. Like, sure, it's fine sometimes, but I'm not gonna eat it every day for every meal.
Scorsese is 80 years old, and it galls him to know that the Marvel films through Avengers Endgame represent a signature cultural event in the cinema of our time. When Marty is gone, and an entire body of work steeped in the belief that toxic masculinity is the organizing principle of the cosmos is reassessed. It will be interesting to see if his highly personal oeuvre can stake the same claim.
Well, that's one terrible way to end your pathetic Marvel dick writing article. All I'll say is this: Scorsese's films will be loved and cherished now and in the future. Can you say the same about Marvel's films? I honestly don't even remember which Marvel films came out this year alone. That's it for this heinous article. If you think Scorsese is a hack, please tell me down below.